Caught my wife and cousin in our hot tub on her birthday. But my parents demanded that Elle not interfere in her new relationship. So I reclaimed the bracelet and car. Now they're begging me. My wife, Alexandra, just turned 28, and I wanted her birthday to be etched in her memory forever. Without a doubt, she'll remember it, but not for the reasons I had imagined. We've been married for 3 years. Our marriage wasn't perfect, as they rarely are, but I thought we were doing well. I always made an effort to be the guy who remembered our anniversary, picked up her favorite snacks after work, and planned special dates, even when my schedule was packed. So, with her birthday approaching, I decided to do something big to show her how much she meant to me. The plan was simple. A surprise party with her close friends and family at her favorite Italian restaurant, a personalized cake decorated with the flowers she adores, lavender and daisies, for the record, and, to top it all off, a diamond bracelet she'd been eyeing for months. It wasn't a cheap gift, but what can you do? You only turn 28 once. The night started off wonderfully. Alexandra was laughing, people were toasting her, and I was convinced I'd nailed it. I'd even arranged for her favorite song to play when they brought out the cake. Everything seemed perfect, until, between dinner and the cake presentation, I noticed she was gone. At first, I wasn't alarmed. I assumed she'd gone to the restroom or maybe stepped outside to make a call. But 15, then 20 minutes passed, and my unease grew. I started asking people at the table if they'd seen her, but nobody knew anything. I walked around the restaurant, checked the bar area, and the main entrance without finding a trace. It was then that I remembered a back hallway near the restrooms that led to a storage area. I thought maybe she just needed some fresh air, so I headed that way. That's when everything fell apart. As I approached, I could hear voices in a low, whispering tone, too close for comfort. My stomach churned, but I kept going. The voices were coming from the coat closet at the end of the hallway. The door wasn't fully closed. Through the criquet, I could make out the faint glow of a phone screen. My mind screamed at me to stop, but I kept pushing the door open. What I saw took my breath away. There they were, Alexandra and my cousin, Jimmy, wrapped up in each other, their hands everywhere. Her hands were entangled in his hair, and he was holding her. The expression on their faces when they saw me is something I'll never forget. Alexandra's eyes widened as if she'd been caught stealing candy, while Jimmy froze as if he'd seen a ghost. Silence reigned for a brief moment, and then I lost control. I grabbed Jimmy by the collar and shoved him against the wall with such force that even the coats on the rack trembled. "What the is wrong with you?" I yelled. Alexandra tried to intervene, saying it wasn't what it looked like, but I could only let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it looks like? You were kissing my cousin at your birthday party. What other explanation is there?" I said. Jimmy started to stammer something about it just happening, but I'm off immediately. "You have no right to talk to me." Then I released Jimmy and turned to Alexandra. "Don't bother coming home tonight," I said, my voice trembling with rage. She opened her mouth to reply, but I didn't want to hear anything. "We're done," I stated, and left. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't go back to the table or try to explain anything to anyone. I just grabbed my car keys and drove aimlessly. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, sitting alone in a booth, trying to process what had happened. How could she do this to me? And with Jimmy, of all people? Jimmy and I were never very close. He's that cousin who always brags about how smart he is, despite being close to 30, living off odd jobs, and depending on the hospitality of others. I should have sensed he was capable of something like this. But Alexandra, I never expected it. When I got home, Alexandra wasn't there, and frankly, I didn't want to see her that night. My mind kept replaying every moment that led to me discovering them in that closet. Were there signs I didn't see? Did she ever seem distant? Or was I just blind to her actions? The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of missed calls and text messages from Alexandra. They all started with, "Can we talk?" followed by, "It's not what you think," which morphed into, "I'm sorry," and, "Please don't do this." I decided to ignore them. What more could be said? She made her decision when she slept with Jimmy at her own birthday party. At noon, I got a call from my mother, who wanted to know what had happened. Well, according to Alexandra, we had a fight. I told her the truth point blank. I saw her kissing Jimmy at the restaurant. There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end, and then she sighed. "We'll talk later." No reproach or indignation, just those words, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. It felt like my world had turned upside down. As the day went on, the news spread. Some relatives called to confirm what happened, while others advised me to stay calm and not act impulsively. Alexandra had destroyed our marriage, yet I was the one who had to maintain composure. That same night, Alexandra showed up at the house. I didn't let her in. She stood on the porch, sobbing, saying she had made a mistake and that we could get through it. I watched her from the window and coldly said, "Go stay with Jimmy. You two deserve to be together." And so it was. At least for the moment, I thought I could at least count on the support of my family. You'd think that after the betrayal of my wife and my cousin, they'd be on my side. No, I was wrong. Clearly, loyalty had a different meaning for them. 2 days after the disaster at the restaurant, my mother called and asked me to come to her house. With that serious tone she uses when something really matters to her, I thought it was the perfect opportunity for them to support me and perhaps reprimand Jimmy for what happened. I wasn't expecting a full-blown intervention. When I arrived, I immediately noticed the strange atmosphere. My father was sitting at the dining table with his arms crossed, while my mother paced back and forth as if rehearsing a speech. From the moment I walked in, I knew things weren't going to go as I expected. "Sit down," my father said, pointing to the chair across from him. "How are you feeling? How are you handling all of this?" There were no preambles, and I sat down, waiting to hear what they had to say. "We need to talk about Alexandra and Jimmy," my mother began. At that moment, my stomach churned. I thought they were about to tell me that Jimmy had apologized or that Alexandra was leaving town. But none of that happened. What came out of their mouths made me want to flip the table. "Look, what happened wasn't ideal," she said, as if it had been as simple as accidentally spilling a drink at dinner. "But these things happen." I repeated those words aloud, louder than I intended, not really understanding their meaning. "What does that even mean?" I asked incredulously. "She cheated on you with Jimmy, in case you forgot," she replied. And at that very moment, my father raised his hand as if he were a referee calling a timeout. "Son, we're not saying it's okay, but we have to be realistic. If Alexandra and Jimmy have feelings for each other, you can't force them to separate." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of the situation. "Are you seriously trying to justify this? They were kissing in a closet at her birthday party. She's my wife, and Jimmy is my cousin. What part of this is okay?" I listened as my mother intervened, sitting next to me with a tone that was meant to soften things. "Nobody says it's okay, but if there's something real between them—" "Something real?" I interrupted. "That's not something real. It's—" My was boiling. I looked into my father's eyes for some support, but he simply sighed and said, "You have to move on. Holding on to anger won't help anyone. Is that what you want? For me to pretend nothing happened, to let Alexandra and Jimmy run off together, and for me to just put up with it?" It seemed like they cared more about keeping the family together than acknowledging that I was the one who had been betrayed. "Unbelievable," I exclaimed, getting to my feet. "Are you seriously taking their side?" "We're not taking sides," my mother quickly replied. "We just think it's better for everyone if we handle this calmly." I laughed bitterly. "If you want me to handle this calmly, here it is. I'm done with both of them. And if you keep making excuses to justify what they did, then I'm done with you too." My mother looked shocked, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to stay and listen to them try to minimize Alexandra and Jimmy's betrayal as if it were a minor inconvenience to overcome. I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove home, the conversation kept replaying in my mind. How could they be so indifferent? My wife had cheated on me with my cousin, and my own parents wanted to sweep it under the rug in the name of family unity. It was just absurd. When I got home, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some messages were from Alexandra, still trying to apologize and explain herself. Others were from my parents, insisting that I was being irrational and that I should come back to talk things through. Talk about what? Is there something to talk about? I thought. Alexandra and Jimmy made their decisions, and now they have to face the consequences. If my parents want to play peacemakers, let them. But I'm not going to be a part of their twisted idea of family. That night, my sister Louisa, the only one in the family who always had my back, called. Louisa, who's a few years younger than me and never hesitates to point out nonsense, said, "I heard about what happened. You don't need to repeat it. Mom and Dad are acting like idiots. I can't believe they're defending Alexandra and Jimmy." "It's not exactly that they're defending them," I explained. "They just don't want the family to fall apart." "Well, newsflash, it already has," I said. "And it's not my fault." "I know," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to know I'm on your side. What they did to you is unforgivable, and you have every right to be furious." Those words meant more to me than I expected. At least someone in my family understood what I was going through. Still, I didn't know how to deal with Mom and Dad. They were acting like I was the problem. "You're not," Louisa stated firmly. "They're just afraid of confrontation. You know how they are. They avoid dealing with real problems." We talked a little more about how chaotic the situation was, and when I hung up, I felt somewhat better knowing Louisa was on my side. However, the frustration with my parents still lingered. The next day, my father sent me a message asking if I was ready to talk like adults. I didn't reply. I was done with the conversations. They had already made their position clear, and so had I. From that moment on, I kept my distance. I stopped attending Sunday dinners, ignored their calls, and no longer tried to explain myself. If they couldn't see how wrong they were, that was their choice. It's funny how people's true colors come out when things get complicated. I thought that my parents would be the first to support me, but they chose to protect those who betrayed me. I don't know what their game is, but I'm not playing. If they want to defend Alexandra and Jimmy, let them. I'm out. After what happened with Alexandra and Jimmy, I tried my best to move on, keep my head down, and not think about it. I off almost all contact with my parents. I thought I'd gotten past the worst of it. Alexandra had left the house, I wasn't answering her calls, and I was focusing on rebuilding my life. But of course, Alexandra found a way to reignite the conflict. About a week after the scandal, I received a message from an unknown number. Yes, I blocked her on every other platform. I had no intention of opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message began with her usual spiel. Please, can we talk? I need to explain. Blah, blah, blah. I was about to delete it when I got to the last part. I think I should keep the bracelet. The bracelet? After everything that happened, she intended to keep the diamond bracelet I gave her, a piece of jewelry I worked my butt off to afford. I couldn't believe her audacity. To be clear, that bracelet wasn't just any accessory. I had spent months saving to buy it, thinking it was the perfect way to show her how much she meant to me. Since she'd wanted it for so long. And now, after cheating on me with my cousin, she felt entitled to keep it. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to calm down. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. There was no way she was getting away with taking the bracelet as if it were a trophy for being the most blatant cheater of the year. After a little digging, I discovered Alexandra had moved into a small apartment in the next town over. Probably the best Jimmy could afford since, let's be honest, the guy's a joke. I didn't plan on showing up unannounced, but I knew where Alexandra worked. She'd been at a jewelry boutique downtown for a while, and I suspected she might have stashed the bracelet in her locker. The next morning, I showed up at the store under the pretense of browsing. I walked in, made small talk with one of her coworkers, and casually glanced around. Just in the back, I saw Alexandra assisting a customer. When she saw me, her face went pale, and she almost immediately exclaimed, "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the bracelet," I said, keeping my cool. "You know, the one I bought you." Her expression changed drastically, as if she'd just been slapped. "Seriously?" she asked indignantly. "It was a gift intended for my wife," I retorted. "My wife, Alexandra?" "So give it back," I ordered. She stammered and made excuses about how unfair it was. But I wasn't interested in hearing them. "You give it to me now, or I call the police. You decide," I added. At that very moment, the manager, uncomfortable with the commotion, approached us. Alexandra tried to spin some sob story, but I her off by showing the receipt for the bracelet. "Yes, I have it, and it's mine," I affirmed. "Purchased by me, never given as any kind of legal gift." The manager, visibly uneasy, sided with me. Alexandra retreated to the back of the store, muttering. She returned with the bracelet in her hand. "Here," she exclaimed, practically throwing it at me. "I hope you're happy." "Oh, I am," I replied. The moment I put the bracelet in my pocket, I thought to myself, thanks for making this so easy. Walking out of that store, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted. It wasn't just about getting a piece of jewelry back. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Afterwards, I took the bracelet straight to a jeweler and sold it. I wasn't interested in getting full value. Seeing it gone was enough. The jeweler handed me cash on the spot, and with the money, I bought something I really wanted. A new laptop and some upgrades for my car. That same night, Alexandra didn't miss the opportunity to make a scene. She sent me a message saying, "You're pathetic. You stole my bracelet, and I hope you feel good about yourself." I didn't even bother replying. What argument could justify her keeping it after everything she did? The next day, my mother called. Turns out Alexandra had been complaining to her, telling her I was spiteful. When my mother said spiteful, I couldn't help but laugh. She cheated on me with Jimmy, and she thought she could keep the bracelet I bought her. Before my mother could explain herself, I interrupted, "Don't try to defend her, Mom." She sighed and decided not to delve any deeper, understanding, I suppose, that I wasn't going to budge on this issue. The funniest and most ridiculous thing was that later that week, Jimmy left me a voicemail saying I needed to grow up and let Alexandra keep the bracelet. I didn't even take the time to listen to the whole message. I deleted it immediately. If he thought I cared about his opinion, he was completely mistaken. At the end of the day, it wasn't about the money or the object itself. It was about the principle. Alexandra couldn't walk out of our marriage with her head held high, playing the victim. Getting that bracelet back was my way of saying, this time, you don't win. And believe me, it felt amazing.